The screech of tires still echoed in Sarah Mitchell's nightmares 3 months after the accident. One moment, David had been her vibrant husband of 8 years discussing their weekend plans over breakfast. The next, she was sitting in a sterile hospital room watching machines breathe for the man she loved. The traumatic brain injury had stolen more than David's mobility. It had fractured his personality, leaving him confused, angry, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. Sarah threw herself into his care with the dedication of a soldier. She worked her marketing executive job during the day, then rushed home to help David with physical therapy, medications, and the countless daily tasks he could no longer manage alone. Their savings dwindled rapidly. David's insurance covered the basics, but the specialized care he needed, the cognitive therapy, the adaptive equipment, the home modifications, fell to Sarah's already stretched salary. She sold her jewelry, took on freelance projects, and quietly applied for a second mortgage. Love meant sacrifice, and she'd sacrifice everything for David's recovery. That's when the Mitchell family descended like vultures. Eleanor Mitchell had never approved of her son's marriage to a common marketing executive. Now, with David's multi-million-dollar trust fund hanging in the balance, she saw an opportunity. Patricia, David's sister, had always resented Sarah's close relationship with David, especially since Sarah had been the one David confided in about Patricia's gambling addiction. James, the youngest, simply followed his mother's lead, hoping to secure his own financial future. "She's killing you slowly, David," Eleanor whispered during her daily visits, always when Sarah was at work. "Look how tired you are, look how thin you've got. A loving wife wouldn't let this happen." Patricia was more direct. "I saw the bank statements, David. She's been moving money around, making payments you don't know about. She's probably planning to put you in some awful facility and take everything." The accusations were surgical in their precision. They exploited David's post-injury paranoia, his confusion about finances, his fear of abandonment. Sarah watched helplessly as the man she'd devoted her life to saving began looking at her with suspicion and fear. "Why are you really here?" David asked one evening, his words slurred but his eyes sharp with distrust. "What do you get out of this?" Sarah's heart shattered. She'd given up promotions, friendships, her own health, all to care for him, but David's injured brain couldn't process the logic of love over money. In his confused state, his family's poison seemed more believable than her devotion. The campaign was relentless and cruel. They painted Sarah as a gold digger who'd trapped a vulnerable man, a manipulator who isolated him from his real family. And slowly, tragically, David began to believe them. The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow on a Tuesday afternoon in November. She'd returned home early from work with a migraine, hoping to rest before David's evening medication. The house was unusually quiet. David was napping, and she thought Eleanor had left after her daily visit. Sarah was heading to the kitchen for water when she heard Eleanor's voice drifting from the guest room, where the older woman often made her phone calls. "The plan is working perfectly, Patricia." David's completely turned against her now. Eleanor's voice carried the satisfaction of someone discussing a successful business deal, not the destruction of her son's marriage. Sarah froze, her hand gripping the doorframe. "Have you been getting the recordings?" Eleanor continued. "Yesterday I got her snapping at him when he spilled his medication. She said, 'David, for God's sake, be careful,' in this exasperated tone. With the right editing, it'll sound absolutely vicious." Sarah's blood turned to ice. They'd been recording her. Every moment of frustration, every exhausted sigh during David's difficult days, they'd been documenting her human reactions to twist into evidence of abuse. "The attorney says we have enough for the divorce filing," Eleanor went on. "Once David signs the power of attorney papers, we can move him somewhere proper, somewhere she can't get her claws into him." James found a lovely facility upstate. Very exclusive, very expensive, but worth it to keep David's money in the family, where it belonged. The casual cruelty in Eleanor's voice made Sarah's stomach churn. They weren't just stealing her husband, they were planning to warehouse him in an institution so they could control his fortune. "What about her reputation?" Patricia's voice crackled through the speakerphone, gleeful and vindictive. "I've been talking to the neighbors, the people at their old gym. Everyone's so concerned about poor David being trapped with a gold digger. Susan from the grocery store actually crossed herself when I told her how Sarah's been managing his finances. Sarah bit her fist to keep from gasping. The isolation she'd felt, the strange looks from neighbors, the friends who'd stopped calling. It hadn't been her imagination. The Mitchell family had systematically poisoned her entire social network. Over the following weeks, the full scope of their betrayal became clear. David had started meeting with a divorce attorney, Harold Brennan, a family friend who'd known the Mitchells for decades. Sarah watched her husband lie to her face, claiming his Tuesday appointments were with a new neurologist, when she knew he was discussing how to leave her. The man who once brought her coffee in bed now flinched when she touched him. He'd started locking his phone, hiding papers, and questioning every purchase she made for their household. The medication that was supposed to help his cognitive function had mysteriously stopped working. Sarah later realized Eleanor was helping him skip doses, keeping him confused and pliable. Most devastating of all, David had started talking about their marriage like it was a business arrangement. "You've been very kind, Sarah," he said one evening, his voice cold and formal, "but I think it's time we both moved on with our lives." 8 years of love, reduced to kindness. A lifetime partnership dismissed as a convenience. Sarah realized she was fighting not just for her marriage, but for David's very soul, and she was losing. Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights processing the magnitude of their betrayal before a cold clarity settled over her. If the Mitchell family wanted to play dirty, she'd give them a masterclass in strategic warfare. But first she needed to understand exactly what she was up against. The next morning, while David attended his fake neurologist appointment, Sarah searched their home with the methodical precision of a detective. She found the recording devices, tiny expensive units, hidden in the living room lamp, the kitchen cabinet, even their bedroom. Professional-grade equipment that had been capturing every private moment of their struggle. Instead of destroying them, Sarah left everything exactly as she'd found it. If they wanted to record her, she'd give them a performance worth documenting. Her first call was to Marcus Rivera, a private investigator recommended by her divorce attorney friend from college. Marcus specialized in family fraud cases and had seen plenty of inheritance manipulation schemes. "The good news is they're arrogant," Marcus told her during their discreet meeting at a coffee shop across town. "Arrogant people make mistakes. The bad news is your husband's condition makes this complicated legally. We need to prove they're exploiting his vulnerability, not just disagreeing with his choices." Sarah's plan crystallized over the following weeks. She would document everything while appearing to retreat in defeat. Let them think they were winning while she built an airtight case against them. Phase 1 involved her own recording system. Marcus provided her with professional-grade equipment that she strategically placed throughout the house. Unlike the Mitchell family's hidden devices, Sarah's setup was designed to capture full conversations with context. No selective editing, no manipulation. The results were more damning than she'd hoped. Eleanor, emboldened by Sarah's apparent resignation, began speaking freely about their scheme. "David's so much more manageable now that we've gotten that woman under control," Eleanor told Patricia during one of their strategy sessions in the kitchen. "Once the divorce is final, we'll have him sign over the power of attorney, and that'll be the end of our money problems." "What about the facility?" Patricia asked. "He still talks about wanting to get better, wanting to go back to work." Eleanor's laugh was ice cold. "Honey, David's never going back to work. The brain injury was a blessing in disguise. He's finally controllable. We just need to keep him confused enough to sign papers but lucid enough that it looks legitimate." Sarah's hands shook as she transcribed the recording. They weren't just stealing from David, they were deliberately sabotaging his recovery to maintain control over him. Phase 2 involved financial documentation. Sarah discovered that James had been intercepting David's medical bills and insurance communications, rerouting them to an address she didn't recognize. When she investigated, she found he'd been submitting fraudulent claims and pocketing the difference. More disturbing, Eleanor had convinced David to give her access to his investment accounts for his protection. Transaction records showed she'd been moving money into accounts under Patricia's name, claiming she was diversifying his portfolio for safety. Sarah began documenting every conversation, every suspicious transaction, every lie they told David about his condition or finances. She recorded Eleanor coaching David on what to say to his attorney, Patricia bragging to her book club about how they'd handled the gold digger situation, and James discussing with his girlfriend how he planned to buy a new boat with his share of David's money. The most heartbreaking recording came when Sarah captured Eleanor deliberately confusing David about his medication schedule, telling him his cognitive therapy was making him worse and that he should skip sessions. "You don't need all these doctors, sweetheart," Eleanor cooed. "You just need your family to take care of you. All this therapy is just putting ideas in your head about getting independent again." Sarah realized they weren't just stealing David's money, they were stealing his chance at recovery, keeping him dependent and confused to serve their financial interests. By December, Sarah had assembled a comprehensive dossier of their conspiracy: financial fraud, elder abuse, interference with medical care, and systematic psychological manipulation. She'd given them enough rope to hang themselves with, and they'd used every inch of it. Now came the hard part, letting them think they'd won while she prepared to destroy them completely. By January, the Mitchell family's confidence had reached dangerous levels. Sarah's apparent defeat had emboldened them to abandon all pretense of subtlety. Eleanor moved into the guest room permanently, claiming David needed round-the-clock family supervision. Patricia began accompanying David to all his medical appointments, introducing herself as his primary caregiver, and systematically excluding Sarah from treatment decisions. James took the most brazen step of all. He convinced David to sign papers transferring financial oversight to him, ostensibly to reduce Sarah's burden during these difficult times. Within days, Sarah's access to their joint accounts was mysteriously frozen due to suspicious activity. "It's just a precaution," David explained when Sarah confronted him, his words clearly rehearsed. "James thinks someone might be trying to take advantage of my condition. You understand, don't you?" Sarah understood perfectly. She was being systematically erased from her own life while her husband watched it happen with blank acceptance. The family's boldness provided Sarah with increasingly damning evidence. Eleanor, now comfortable in what she considered her domain, spoke freely about their plan. "The facility tour went beautifully," Eleanor told Patricia during one of their morning coffee sessions. "Shady Oaks is perfect, far enough from the city that she'll never visit, expensive enough to drain a good portion of his accounts yearly, and their memory care unit will keep him too medicated to cause problems." Patricia's response chilled Sarah to the bone. "What about when he asks for her?" "You know he still does, especially in the evenings when he's confused." "Oh honey, that's the beauty of progressive memory care," Eleanor replied with casual cruelty. "In 6 months he won't remember her name." The doctors say trauma patients often forget their most recent relationships first. Something about protecting the brain from stress. "We're just helping nature take its course." They were planning to institutionalize David and let medical interventions erase her from his memory entirely. It was psychological murder, slow and deliberate. Sarah's recording system captured even more disturbing revelations. James, drunk on power and wine during a dinner party, bragged to his friends about his brilliant financial maneuvering. David's got about $3 million in various accounts, plus the trust fund kicks in another $2 million when he turns 40. James slurred into Sarah's hidden microphone. "The beauty is, she never bothered to put her name on anything significant. Legally, we're just protecting family assets from a gold digger." When one friend questioned the ethics, James's response revealed the depth of their premeditation. "Look, David's basically a vegetable. He's never going to recover enough to manage money or make real decisions. We're just making sure it stays in the family instead of funding some bitch's shopping sprees." The friend's uncomfortable silence was telling, but James continued. "Besides, we've got hours of recordings of her being abusive. One call to Adult Protective Services, and she'll be lucky if she doesn't face criminal charges." The threat hit Sarah like a physical blow. They weren't just planning to steal everything. They intended to frame her as an abuser and potentially send her to prison. Sarah's counterintelligence reached its most crucial phase when she discovered Patricia forging David's signature on legal documents. Using a small camera provided by Marcus, Sarah captured Patricia practicing David's post-injury signature on bank forms and insurance paper. "It's not really forgery," Patricia told Eleanor during the session Sarah recorded. "I'm just helping him with paperwork he can't manage himself." The lawyers said as long as the intent is there, the signature doesn't have to be perfect. Eleanor's response revealed their complete awareness of the fraud. "Just make sure you vary it slightly each time. We don't want it to look too practical." The most devastating blow came in late January when David, influenced by weeks of manipulation, served Sarah with divorce papers and a restraining order. The allegations were expertly crafted fiction, financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and increasingly violent outbursts toward a disabled man. Harold Brennan, the family attorney, had used Sarah's own exhausted moments, captured and edited by the Mitchell family as evidence of systematic abuse. Her frustrated "David, please try to focus" became intimidation. Her tears during difficult medical appointments became emotional manipulation. Her careful management of their finances became financial exploitation. The restraining order forced Sarah from her own home. She watched from her temporary apartment as moving trucks arrived to relocate David to Shady Oaks. Eleanor supervised the process with the satisfaction of a general winning a decisive battle. But as Sarah sat in her exile, surrounded by boxes of evidence and recordings, she knew the Mitchell family's victory celebration was premature. They'd given her everything she needed to destroy them completely. They just didn't know it yet. The final phase of her plan was about to begin. The divorce hearing was scheduled for February 14th. A cruel irony that wasn't lost on Sarah as she sat in the courthouse waiting room, her heart pounding with anticipation rather than fear. Across the hall, the Mitchell family clustered around David's wheelchair like protective vultures. Eleanor stroking his hand while whispering reassurances about finally being free from that woman. Harold Brennan, their family attorney, exuded the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case involving obvious gold diggers. He'd prepared a devastating presentation of Sarah's abusive behavior, complete with edited audio clips and carefully selected medical records, showing David's decline under her care. Sarah's attorney, Janet Chen, was a specialist in elder abuse cases who'd reviewed every piece of evidence Sarah had compiled. "Are you ready for this?" Janet asked quietly. "Once we start, there's no going back. This will destroy them completely." Sarah looked across the hall at Eleanor, who was now discussing lunch plans with Patricia as if David's life was just another social engagement to manage. "They destroyed themselves. I'm just presenting the evidence." The hearing began with Brennan's confident presentation. He painted Sarah as a calculating predator who'd isolated David from his loving family, controlled his finances, and systematically abused a vulnerable man for financial gain. "Your Honor," Brennan declared, adjusting his expensive tie, "the evidence clearly shows a pattern of exploitation. Mrs. Mitchell's own words, captured on audio, demonstrate her true feelings toward my client." He played the edited recordings, Sarah's exhausted voice saying, "David, for God's sake, and I can't do this anymore," stripped of all context, made to sound like threats rather than the desperate pleas of an overwhelmed caregiver. Eleanor dabbed her eyes with a tissue as Brennan continued. "The defendant has systematically isolated Mr. Mitchell from his family's support, refused their offers of help, and created a hostile environment that has severely impacted his recovery." David sat quietly in his wheelchair, nodding along with testimony that portrayed Sarah as a monster and his family as saints. The brain injury had made him suggestible, but Sarah could see flickers of the man she'd married in his confused expression. When Brennan finished his presentation, he settled back in his chair with the smug satisfaction of a job well done. Eleanor actually smiled at Sarah, a cold, victorious expression that said, "We won." Janet Chen stood slowly, her expression gray. "Your Honor, before we respond to these allegations, we need to address some concerning discoveries about the plaintiff's family and their treatment of both Mr. Mitchell and the defendant." She activated the courtroom's audio system. "What you're about to hear are unedited recordings made by the Mitchell family themselves, as well as additional recordings that provide crucial context to this case." The first recording filled the courtroom, Eleanor's voice, crystal clear. "The plan is working perfectly, Patricia." David's completely turned against her now. The color drained from Eleanor's face as her own words continued. "Once David signs the power of attorney papers, we can move him somewhere proper, somewhere she can't get her claws into him." Brennan shot to his feet. "Objection. These recordings were made without consent, Your Honor." Janet interrupted. "These recordings were made using equipment installed by the Mitchell family in the marital home. We're simply presenting the complete, unedited versions of conversations they selectively edited for their case." The judge waved Brennan down. "I'll allow it. Continue." The next recording was Patricia's voice. "I've been talking to the neighbors, the people at their old gym. Everyone's so concerned about poor David being trapped with a gold digger." Sarah watched David's face change as he heard his sister's words, the casual cruelty, the calculated manipulation. For the first time in months, she saw recognition in his eyes, but Janet wasn't finished. She played Eleanor's most damning admission, David's so much more manageable now that we've gotten that woman under control. The brain injury was a blessing in disguise. He's finally controllable. Eleanor's face went ashen as the courtroom heard her describe David's condition as a blessing. David's wheelchair creaked as he turned to stare at his mother, confusion and horror warring in his expression. The financial evidence came next. James's drunken confessions about the $3 million, Patricia's signature forgery practice sessions, Eleanor's systematic theft from David's accounts. The recordings played like a criminal confession, each revelation more damaging than the last. What about when he asks for her? Patricia's voice echoed through the silent courtroom. Oh honey, that's the beauty of progressive memory care. In 6 months, he won't remember her name. David made a choking sound. Whether it was from his injury or emotional shock, Sarah couldn't tell, but his eyes were now fixed on his family with an expression of dawning betrayal. The courtroom erupted as Janet presented the forged documents, the insurance fraud evidence, and the medical records, showing how Eleanor had interfered with David's treatment. Brennan frantically objected to everything, but the evidence was overwhelming and ironclad. Judge Martinez called for order, her face grim. This court has heard enough. Not only are the divorce and restraining order dismissed, but I'm ordering an immediate investigation into elder abuse and financial fraud. Mr. Brennan, I suggest your clients obtain separate legal counsel immediately. As sheriff's deputies approached the Mitchell family, Eleanor looked at Sarah with pure hatred. You destroyed our family, she hissed. The weeks following the hearing unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Eleanor was arrested on charges of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Patricia faced fraud charges for the forged documents and insurance scams. James, caught with his hands literally in David's accounts, was charged with embezzlement and conspiracy. Their high society friends distanced themselves overnight, and the family's reputation crumbled as thoroughly as their legal defense. The most satisfying moment came when Sarah received a call from Marcus Rivera. You might want to check the social media, he said with barely contained amusement. Someone leaked the courtroom recordings. Within hours, justice for Sarah was trending. The recordings had gone viral, shared by thousands of people outraged by the family's manipulation of a vulnerable man. Eleanor's blessing in disguise comment became a meme, and Patricia's calculating voice coaching became a cautionary tale about toxic family dynamics. But Sarah's real victory wasn't in their public humiliation, it was in the quiet moments with David as his mind cleared. The first breakthrough came 3 days after the hearing. David, now receiving proper medical care without his family's interference, looked at Sarah with eyes that held recognition and shame. I remember, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Not everything, but I remember loving you. I remember you staying up all night when I couldn't sleep after the accident. I remember you selling your grandmother's ring to pay for my therapy. Sarah took his hand, feeling the wedding ring he'd never removed despite everything. I remember too, the road to recovery was long and difficult. David's cognitive therapy resumed without Eleanor's sabotage, and slowly, steadily, he began to reclaim pieces of himself. Some memories returned in fragments, their first date, their wedding day, quiet Sunday mornings before the accident. Others were lost forever, casualties of both the brain injury and his family's psychological warfare. But new memories formed too. David learning to walk again with Sarah's support, late-night conversations as he processed the betrayal of the people he'd trusted most. The day he finally understood the full scope of what his family had done, not just to Sarah, but to him. They were going to lock me away, he said one evening, staring at the legal documents Sarah had used to expose them. They were going to let me disappear so they could spend my money. But they didn't, Sarah replied. And they never will. David's recovery accelerated once he was free from his family's toxic influence. The confusion and paranoia that had plagued him began to fade as his medication regimen was properly managed. His physical therapy progressed faster than doctors had expected. Most importantly, his trust in Sarah returned, stronger than before, because it had been tested and proven unbreakable. The legal resolution provided its own satisfaction. Eleanor received 2 years in prison and was ordered to pay full restitution. Patricia got 18 months, and community service. James, as the primary financial conspirator, received 3 years. All 3 were permanently barred from contact with David or any access to his finances. David restructured his entire estate, creating an irrevocable trust that protected both his and Sarah's futures. He changed his will to leave everything to Sarah and designated her as his sole decision-maker for medical and financial matters. Most importantly, he added a clause that specifically excluded his biological family from any inheritance or decision-making power. 6 months after the hearing, Sarah and David renewed their wedding vows in a small ceremony attended by the friends who had truly supported them through the crisis. David's speech was halting but heartfelt. "Sarah saved my life twice, once after the accident, and once from my own family. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that love." As they danced to their wedding song, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd lost a naive faith in family loyalty but gained an unshakable confidence in her own strength. She'd learned that sometimes love means fighting for someone even when they can't fight for themselves. The Mitchell family had tried to write Sarah out of David's story. Instead, they'd only made their love story stronger, built on a foundation of tested trust and hard-won truth. Justice, Sarah discovered, was sweeter when it came with a side of genuine love.